Nestled within the withered embrace of gargantuan oaks, Blackwood Hall stood in dignified decay, its centuries-old stones cloaked in a facade of lichen and misfortune. It was a place whispered about in the nearby village, as generations of residents cautiously circled tales of its lamented occupant, Miss Eleanor Thorne. Eleanor, once a vibrant beauty with laughter echoing through the sprawling corridors, had become a shadow since that fateful night. The night was thick with autumn mist when her beloved Edward was called to wartime borders, a parting under the ill-omened gaze of the churning heavens. His promise of return was drowned by the sound of merciless rains that seemed to foresee the relentless years to come. Years turned into decades, and the villagers noticed the nocturnal glow of candlelight weaving through the deepest nights at Blackwood. They told stories of a figure donned in Victorian mourning garb, wandering the desolate halls, her silhouette distorted through the ornate stained-glass windows. One indigo twilight, a curious guest to the village, Mr. Edgar Mallory, a scholar of the occult and haunted histories, ventured towards this reclusive estate, driven by a concoction of intrigue and skepticism. His knocks echoed unanswered, until the heavy oak door groaned ajar with no apparent usher. Edgar stepped into the shadowy foyer, where the air hung heavy, scented with lavender and decay. As if led by an unseen force, Edgar traversed the murky corridors lined with ancestral portraits, whose eyes seemed to flicker with a spectral light, observing his every move. His candle illuminated elaborate tapestries that told tales of the Thorne lineage, battles fought, and lost loves. After what seemed like an eternity spent in whispered communion with the house's dark essence, Edgar came upon a grand salon adorned in cobwebs and sorrow. There, under a dust-laden chandelier, stood Eleanor, her back to him, gazing out of a bay window veiled in tattered drapes. The glass was blurred with the relentless fingers of many rains, but she stood motionless, her gaze eternal. "Excuse me, Miss Thorne," Edgar's voice a hesitant whisper, breaking the timbre of pronounced silence. Eleanor paused, and slowly turned towards him, her face as pale as the spectral moon, her eyes deep wells of sorrow. "Eternal is the wait for those who never return," she murmured, her voice as frail as autumn leaves underfoot. "Do you bring tidings of my beloved Edward?" Taken aback, Edgar replied, "No, Miss Thorne, I am but a traveller captivated by the legends of Blackwood Hall." His words seemed to drift away into the cavernous shadows that seemed to consume them both. "Eternal wait indeed," she repeated, before she dissolved into the cold mist that began to envelop the room, leaving Edgar bewildered and chilled to his core. Outside, as he hastened back through the gnarled trees, the wind whispered through the branches as if repeating Eleanor's lament. The village lay asleep under the hush of a haunted moon, oblivious to the ceaseless heartache wallowed within the weathered stones of Blackwood Hall. From that night on, Edgar often recounted his tale, a story of glare and gloom, to those willing to hear of the otherworldly sorrows trapped within the decaying grandeur. Yet, whenever he spoke of Eleanor, a peculiar look would shadow his eyes, a look that carried the bind of her sadness, a burden from the spectral folds of Blackwood. As years wore on, the hall crumbled further, but Eleanor's tale, her eternal weight, became quietly interwoven with the fabric of the wing-beaten night. A Gothic tale nonetheless embraced by time's unforgiving hands.